The treaty knife sat in its cedar box on the polished oak table, mother-of-pearl inlay catching the 417 light slanting through the tall windows. But Thea knew, without opening the lid, that the blade inside had been wiped clean of protocol. Someone had used it since last night's sealing ceremony. Someone had sharpened it. Her footsteps echoed off the stone walls of the treaty room as she walked toward the table. The Third Kingdom's armistice chamber always felt too big in the late afternoon. Too quiet. Too much like a tomb waiting for bodies. She was halfway across the floor when she realized she wasn't alone. He stood with his back to her at the north wall, fingers tracing the carved wooden wolves that watched over every negotiation. Kaelen, Crown Prince of the Northern Kingdom. Her opposite at every treaty table for 7 autumns now. Thea's hand drifted to her belt where her short sword usually hung. Empty. Of course. No weapons in the treaty room. Just the knife in the box, and the memory of smoke. She should hate him. His father's army had burned her border garrison when she was 19. She'd lost 12 soldiers she'd trained with since childhood. Lost the blacksmith who'd taught her to sharpen her own blade. Lost the oak tree she'd climbed as a girl, now ash in a field. But standing here, watching his knuckles trace the wolves' carved manes, she noticed something she'd never seen before. His knuckles were split. Dried blood in the creases, fresh scabs on the joints. The same way hers looked after she stayed up too late sharpening her short sword, unable to sleep, unable to stop preparing for a war that kept not coming. He still hadn't turned around. The clock on the south wall ticked. 417 became 418. Autumn light, gold, and amber, pulled on the floor between them like spilled honey. Thea moved to the treaty box and began her ritual. Opened the cedar lid. Check the blade for oxidation. Run the oilcloth along the steel. Close the lid. 7 years of this, every Tuesday and Thursday, the terms of the armistice requiring both kingdoms' representatives to maintain the signing knife together. She didn't look at him. He didn't look at her. But she heard his footsteps cross the room. Felt the air shift as he stopped beside her, close enough that she could smell the pine soap from his morning wash, the leather of his boots, something faint and metallic that might have been the same exhaustion she tasted at the back of her own throat. His hand reached past hers. Not for the knife. For the oilcloth. He took it, folded it to a clean side, and began wiping the blade spine. His fingers brushed hers. Less than a second. She didn't pull away. Neither did he. "Your hands are shaking," he said. Her voice caught somewhere below her ribs. "I sharpened too long last night." "I know." He didn't look up from the blade. "I saw your window light from the east tower. You keep it open, even in autumn." She should have felt exposed. Instead she felt seen. There was a difference, she was learning, and it sat heavy and warm in her chest like the last ember of a fire she'd thought was ash. "You should close it," he added. "The cold will dull your edge." Thea said nothing, but when he set down the cloth, she didn't immediately reach for it. They stood together, breathing the same air, watching the same light crawl across the same treaty wolves carved into the same north wall, and for the first time in 7 years, Thea wondered if he dreamed about the smoke too. Then the east wing exploded. The sound hit her chest first, a compression, a physical weight, like standing too close to a thunderstrike. Then her ears filled with pressure, then silence, then a high, thin ring that swallowed everything else. Dust rained from the ceiling. Fine white powder, like flour, like ash. It settled on the treaty knife cedar box, on the mother-of-pearl inlay, on his shoulders and her hair and the space between them that had shrunk without her noticing. He was saying something. His mouth moved. She watched his lips form words she couldn't hear. His hand, split knuckles, fresh scabs, reached for her wrist. She let him. Through the settling dust, Thea looked at the north wall. The carved wolves, guardians of 7 years of fragile peace, now wore a crack from snout to tail. Not shattered. Not destroyed. But changed. Marked. Her hearing returned in fragments. First the clock, still ticking. Then his voice. Need to move. Now. She looked at his hand on her wrist. At the dust in his hair. At the gold thread on his collar, royal crest, northern weave, and the question she couldn't ask yet. Asterisk, did you know this was coming? Asterisk. Asterisk, did you make it come? Asterisk. Asterisk, are you saving me or taking me? Asterisk. She didn't ask. She just grabbed the treaty knife, cedar box, and all, and followed him toward the maintenance tunnel. Later, when the sun had fully set and they crouched behind the stables in cold night air, Thea would look at that crack in the carved wolf and realize something she couldn't know. The crack had been there before the explosion. She just hadn't wanted to see it. But that was later. Right now, in the settling dust, with his hand around her wrist and the treaty knife warm from her grip, Thea made her choice. She didn't pull away. She never would again. Outside, the autumn light kept falling. The clock kept ticking. The crack in the wolf ran deeper than stone, and somewhere in the east wing, the flames were still finding wood to consume. But in the treaty room, where two people who should have been enemies stood closer than protocol allowed, something else was also finding fuel. Something that had been waiting 7 years for air. The maintenance tunnel smelled like rust and old stone. Thea pressed a palm against the wall to steady herself, but the iron pipes running overhead trembled under her touch, still vibrating from the explosion. 7:52 p.m. 43 minutes since the east wing collapsed. 43 minutes since she'd last seen sky. Her breath came too fast. She knew this feeling. It was the same thing that happened after the garrison burned, her lungs forgetting how to work, her chest caving in like the smoke was still there. She tried to count. 1 wolf. 2 wolves. 3. His hand found her wrist in the dark. She flinched. Then stopped. Because his fingers weren't steady either. They pressed against her pulse point like he was reading her heartbeat, and underneath his touch, her own pulse hammered back at him. Not from fear. From recognition. His heart was racing too. Can you walk? His voice was low, barely audible over the drip of water somewhere deeper in the tunnel. She nodded, then realized he couldn't see her. Yes. Good. Stay behind me. There's a service exit about 200 feet ahead. Thea wanted to ask how he knew that. How he knew this tunnel existed at all. How he knew the exact distance to the door. But her throat was full of dust, and every word she swallowed tasted like the plaster and timber and someone's forgotten papers burning in the east wing. So she just followed. The tunnel narrowed. The pipes got lower. She had to crouch now, one hand on the cold stone floor, the other still holding the treaty knife. Cedar box. Mother of pearl inlay. She hadn't let go of it since the explosion. She didn't know why. Her knee found something sharp. Rebar, maybe. Or broken stone. Pain shot up her thigh, hot and bright. She bit her lips so hard she tasted copper. Swallowed it. Kept moving. He must have heard her stumble. His hand found hers in the dark, not her wrist this time, but her palm. Fingers laced between hers. Pulled her forward. Neither of them spoke about it. The service door was exactly where he said it would be. Rusted iron handle. A sliver of moonlight underneath. Kaelen pushed. The door groaned but didn't open. He pushed again. Nothing. Thea looked at the frame. It's locked from outside. I know. Then why did you? Because I hoped I was wrong. His voice sounded different. Flatter. She couldn't see his face in the dark, but she could feel the change in him. The same shift she'd seen in soldiers right before they admitted defeat. Right before they made a choice they couldn't take back. He reached into his coat. Pulled out something small, metallic. A dispatch tube. His family's royal crest embossed on the side. Still warm. Thea stared at it. What is that? He didn't answer. What is that, Kaelen? I found it this morning. Outside the treaty room door. His thumb traced the crest. It was addressed to my father. But the seal was already broken. Her chest stopped caving. It went completely still. What did it say? He turned the tube over. A single thread of gold fiber caught the moonlight, caught in the seam, barely visible, the same color as the embroidery on her formal delegation robes. The same fiber they'd found woven into last month's treason letter. The one signed with her signature. The one that had nearly gotten her executed. "I didn't do this," he said. The words hung in the dark between them. No breath. No movement. Just the drip of water and the thud of her heart and the weight of 7 years of not knowing whose side anyone was really on. Then Thea made her choice. She took the dispatch tube from his hands. Bent down. Wedged the treaty knife, her copy, not the room's, into the gap between the service door and its rusted frame. Pushed. The wood splintered. The lock broke. Cold November air rushed in, and she pulled him through the grate into the night. They emerged behind the stables. Torchlight flickered from the main courtyard 50 yards away. Horses shifted in their stalls, restless, smelling smoke. No one saw them. No one called out. Thea collapsed against the stable wall. Her knee throbbed. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She looked down at the treaty knife still clutched in her fingers and realized the blade was smeared with her own blood. Beside her, Kaelen was doing the same thing, pressing his back to the wood, tilting his face toward the sky. Breathe in. Breathe out. She'd never seen him look so young. Then the torchlight caught his collar. Gold thread. Woven into the wool. Fine, delicate, unmistakable. The same fiber she'd spent 3 months trying to prove wasn't hers. The same evidence that had painted a target on her back. She stared at it. He followed her gaze. His hand went to his collar, touched the thread, and something shifted in his expression. Not guilt. Not shock. Recognition. "The dispatch tube," he said slowly. "The thread must have transferred when you what?" He met her eyes. "When I picked it up. This morning. Before the explosion. You picked up evidence from a treason investigation and put it in your coat." "Yes." "Why?" The torchlight flickered. His face was half shadow, half gold. "Because I knew it wasn't yours. And I knew someone wanted it to look like it was." Thea didn't move. Didn't breathe. The stable creaked. A horse stamped its foot. Somewhere far away, bells began to ring. The alarm, finally, 2 hours too late. "You believed me," she said. Not a question. "I always believed you." 7 years. 7 years of sitting across from each other at treaty tables. 7 years of never saying, "I know your handwriting because I read every letter you send. I know you sign your name with the pen tilted left. I know that forgery was wrong in ways I can't prove but feel in my bones. Thea looked at the gold thread on his collar, at the dispatch tube in his hand, at the treaty knife in hers. She should leave him here. She should take this evidence to her commander and let the investigation run its course. She should stop trusting people who appeared in tunnels with convenient explanations and warm dispatch tubes and 7 years of secrets she'd never asked to carry. She should. Instead, she pulled him to his feet. "Come on," she said. "I know a place." He didn't ask where. He didn't ask why. He just followed her into the trees, and behind them, the bells kept ringing, and somewhere in the rubble of the east wing, the real question remained unanswered. If neither of them planted that thread, and neither of them wrote that letter, then who had been holding the treaty knife while they weren't watching? The autumn wind picked up. Cold. Clean. Thea led him north, toward the border, toward a cottage that hadn't held anyone's warmth in 7 years. Behind them, the kingdom's lights grew smaller. Ahead, the trees opened like a door. The cottage remembered her. Thea stood in the doorway of her childhood home, and the floorboards remembered her footsteps. The hearth remembered her mother's hands. The small window above the kitchen sink remembered how she used to press her palm against the glass on winter mornings, melting frost into the shape of birds. She hadn't been here in 7 years. October 17th. 3:03 in the morning. The fire had burned low, orange embers pulsing like a slow heartbeat. Outside, the borderland forest breathed with night sounds, owl calls, wind through pine needles, the distant trickle of the same creek she'd fallen into when she was 8 years old. Kaelen slept by the hearth. He'd insisted on the floor. She'd taken the chair. Neither of them had slept at all. Now she watched him. His face was different in sleep. Softer. The lines around his mouth had smoothed out, and the constant alertness she'd always seen in his eyes, the vigilance of a crown prince who knew his father's enemies were everywhere, had finally released its grip. He looked younger. 26, same as her. But in sleep, he could have been 19 again, before the garrison burned, before the treaties, before she'd learned that hate was easier than curiosity. The scar through his left eyebrow caught the firelight. She'd noticed it 7 years ago, first time they'd sat across from each other at the treaty table. She'd wondered then if it was from battle. It seemed important to imagine him as dangerous. Now she knew better. Sword training. Age 12. His older brother had been showing off, demonstrating a spin strike he'd learned from the master-at-arms. The practice blade caught Kaelen's face instead of the target. His brother apologized for weeks. Kaelen told their father it was an accident. He never told anyone he'd stepped into the path on purpose, just to see if his brother would stop showing off long enough to notice him. Thea didn't know how she knew this. She just did. 7 years of watching him across tables, across rooms, across the distance their names demanded. She'd collected him in fragments, without permission, without even realizing she was gathering. His hands rested palm up on the floor. She looked at his fingers. The callus on his index finger wasn't from a sword. It was from a bow. She'd assumed archer, but now she wondered, target practice or hunting? Did he track deer through northern forests the way she'd tracked foxes through these borderland woods? Did he feel the same quiet when he drew the string back, the world narrowing to just breath and release? His thumb twitched. A dream, maybe. She looked away. The mirror hung crooked on the wall by the door. Silver tarnish had eaten most of the reflection, leaving only fragments, the edge of her jaw, the dark circle under her left eye, the collar of the coat she still wore. His coat. He'd insisted after they crossed the creek. Hers was still wet. She scraped her palm across the mirror surface, wiping condensation and dust. Her face appeared in patches. Disconnected. A nose. A cheekbone. An eye she barely recognized. Who was she now? 7 years ago, she'd been third kingdom through her bones. She'd known her enemies by name and her allies by deed. She'd believed in borders and treaties and the clean logic of ink on paper. Now she was hiding a foreign prince in her dead mother's cottage, and the only thing she knew for certain was that she'd made 7 years of assumptions out of 7 minutes of courage she'd never actually had. She'd never asked him about the garrison. She'd never asked if his father's orders had felt heavy in his hands. She'd never asked if he'd lost anyone too. Thea pressed her palm flat against the cold glass. Her reflection stared back, fragmented and unfamiliar. Why didn't you tell me? His voice was rough with sleep. She hadn't heard him wake. She didn't turn around. Tell you what? That you grew up here. A pause. Floorboards creaked as he sat up. The oak by the creek. The one with the rope swing. I saw it when we crossed. She said nothing. I had one too, he said. Northern red oak, behind the kitchen garden. My brother pushed me too high once and I fell and broke my wrist. I told everyone I'd been training. Thea's palm stayed on the glass. Were you? No. I just wanted him to keep pushing. The fire popped. An ember cracked open, releasing a small bloom of light. She watched it fade. What do you want me to be? He asked. The question landed soft and heavy, like snow on still water. Not demanding. Just asking. Just finally, after 7 years, asking. She turned from the mirror. He was sitting up now, back against the hearthstones, firelight moving across his face in waves. His hair was unbound. She'd never seen it unbound, and it fell across his forehead, almost touching that childhood scar. His hands rested on his knees, open, unguarded. She could have said anything. She could have said, I want you to be the enemy I understood. I want you to be the person I can blame. I want you to be simple, because simple was easier, and easier was safer, and safe was something she hadn't felt since before the smoke. Instead she said, "I want you to stay." His breath caught. She heard it. "Just for tonight," she added. "Just until I figure out what comes next." He nodded. Didn't push. Didn't ask for more. She sat down on the floor across from him, close enough to feel the warmth from the hearth between them. Her knee brushed his. She didn't move away. Neither did he. The fire crackled. The clock on the mantel, her mother's clock, still ticking after all these years, read 3:47. Outside, the borderland forest held its breath. "I sharpened the treaty knife," he said quietly. Thea looked at him. "That night, 3 weeks ago. I found it in the room after you left. The edge was dull, too many signatures, not enough maintenance. I sharpened it and put it back." She remembered. 3 weeks ago, she'd stayed late at the treaty room, unable to sleep. She'd left the knife out. She'd forgotten to return it to the cedar box. "You didn't use it," she said. Not a question. "I didn't use it." He met her eyes. "But I thought about it. Not for what you're thinking. I just..." He paused. "I wanted to touch something you touched." The clock ticked. The fire breathed. And then Thea realized the man who taught her to respect her enemies was the same man teaching her enemy to respect her. She'd learned patience from watching him wait. She'd learned precision from watching him speak. She'd learned that strength didn't always announce itself, that sometimes it looked like silence and still hands and the willingness to stay in a room with someone you'd been taught to hate. He hadn't just been her opposite at the treaty table. He'd been her mirror. And she'd been so busy sharpening her blade that she'd never noticed she was also sharpening herself against him. Thea reached out. Her fingers found his hand. His knuckles, still split, still healing, warmed under her touch. "I want you to stay," she said again. This time, she didn't add conditions. The fire settled into steady glow. The clock kept time. Outside, the first grey of dawn touched the oak by the creek, and the rope swing moved gently in the October wind. No one pushed it. But it moved anyway. Waiting, maybe, for someone to remember how to fly. The Armistice archive smelled of old paper and sealing wax and secrets pressed flat between pages. November 3rd. 11:14 in the morning. Thea stood at the entrance of the delegation chamber and watched the light fall across the long oak table, the empty chairs, the ceremonial flag of the Northern Kingdom draped beside the flag of the Third. 28 days since the explosion. 28 days since she'd pulled him through a rusted service door and into the trees. 28 days since she'd stopped pretending. His father sat at the head of the table. King Aldrich of the Northern Kingdom was smaller than she remembered. Not in height. He was still tall, still broad-shouldered, still carried himself like a man accustomed to rooms falling silent when he entered. But something had diminished him. His hands, resting on the polished oak, were speckled with the brown spots of age. His beard had more grey than she'd catalogued at the autumn conscription. His eyes tracked her across the room the way a hunter tracks a deer that's already in range. Kaelen stood behind him. Ceremonial sword at his hip. Face blank as new parchment. He didn't look at her. Thea's palm found the treaty knife in her coat. Cedar box. Mother of pearl inlay. She'd carried it across the border, through 3 checkpoints, past guards who knew her face and let her pass because she was still Third Kingdom, still one of them, still someone they trusted. She hoped they'd forgive her. She walked to the table, placed the knife in the center, opened the lid, blade toward the king. "I found this in evidence." Her voice came out steady. Her palms sweat inside her gloves. "It's been used to forge 7 signatures. Mine, your son's, the northern envoys, for others across both kingdoms." The king's smile didn't reach his jaw. "Prove it." She laid out the papers. 7 treaties, 7 signatures, 7 dates spanning 18 months. Each forgery flawless to the untrained eye. Each one bearing the microscopic marks of a blade heated and cooled and pressed into wax that had already set. She'd spent 3 weeks learning this. reading everything Kaelen had smuggled from the royal archives, comparing authentic signatures against the forgeries, tracing the weapon's path through both kingdoms, both courts, both families. She'd spent 3 weeks learning that the man who wanted them apart had been standing between them the whole time. The knife has a flaw, she said. A microfracture in the steel, invisible during normal use. But when heated beyond a certain temperature, the fracture creates a unique pattern in the wax, like a fingerprint. She placed the magnifying glass on the table, then the comparison sheets, then the testimony of the northern metallurgist who'd examined the blade and confirmed its history. King Aldrich didn't look at any of it. "You expect me to believe," he said slowly, "that my son's treaty knife, maintained by both kingdoms, guarded by both delegations, was used to forge documents that nearly got you executed. And you had no knowledge of this." "I had no knowledge," Thea said. "Convenient. Truthful." The king leaned back. His fingers drummed the table. Once. Twice. The sound echoed off the stone walls like the ticking of her mother's clock, counting seconds she couldn't get back. "Perhaps," he said, "you sharpened the knife yourself. Perhaps you forged the signatures. Perhaps this entire investigation is the desperate act of a woman who knows her treason is about to be discovered." Thea didn't flinch, didn't look away, didn't give him the satisfaction of watching her break. She'd spent 7 years learning to be still. 7 years of treaty tables and negotiation chambers and rooms full of men who wanted her to prove herself worthy of sitting among them. 7 years of watching Kaelen across the distance, learning from his silence, his patience, his terrible, beautiful restraint. She wasn't the same woman who'd walked into the treaty room on her first day, terrified and furious and desperate to hate everyone who wore his colors. She was someone else now. Someone who knew her own strength. "Burn it with me," she said. She wasn't looking at the king. She was looking at Kaelen. The room went still. Even the dust motes in the November lights seemed to pause mid-drift. Behind her, she heard one of the Third Kingdom delegates shift in his chair. Beside the king, an aide stopped writing mid-sentence. Kaelen's face didn't change, but his hand, the hand resting on the ceremonial sword at his hip, tightened. His knuckles went white. His jaw shifted, just slightly, like he was grinding his teeth. Then he stepped forward. "Father," he said, "I have something to show you." King Aldrich's eyes narrowed. "This is not the time." "It is precisely the time." Kaelen moved to the table. His fingers touched the stack of forged treaties. Not accusing. Not angry. Just certain. "I've known about the knife for 6 weeks. I've known about the forged signatures for 4. I've known who ordered them for 3. The king said nothing. "The evidence is here." Kaelen's voice was quiet. "The metallurgist's report. The witness testimony. The dispatch tube I found outside the treaty room on the morning of the explosion. The one addressed to you, the one with the seal already broken." The silence stretched. Became something else. Something heavier. "You planted the thread," Thea breathed. "On his collar. In the treason letter. You had someone weave it into the evidence." King Aldrich looked at his son. Then at Thea. Then at the treaty knife, still resting in its cedar box, blade toward him like an accusation. "I built this kingdom," he said, "on treaties that required sacrifice. Your mother understood that, Kaelen. Your brother understood it. I expected you to understand it too." "My mother died of grief," Kaelen said, "because you sent her brother to die in a war you started. My brother drinks himself to sleep every night because he knows what you made him do. And I spent 7 years sitting across from a woman I was never supposed to meet, learning to see her as an enemy, because you told me the alternative was worse." He drew his sword. The sound of steel leaving sheath, clean, sharp, final, echoed off the archive walls. Guards moved. Aides gasped. Someone knocked over a water pitcher. Glass shattered. Water spread across the stone floor, reflecting the winter light like broken mirror. But Kaelen didn't raise the blade toward his father. He turned, faced the north wall, faced the treaties, Decades of them, generations of them, his family signatures and hers intertwined in ink and wax and the weight of promises made to dead people. He raised his sword. And he cut. The first treaty fell. Then the second. Then the third. Parchment flooded to the floor like autumn leaves, like ash, like the petals of something that had bloomed too long in poisoned soil. The king's guards drew their weapons. Thea heard the scrape of steel, the shouted orders, the pounding of boots on stone. She heard her own name called by someone behind her, urgent and confused. She heard the clock on the archive wall, 11:32, 11:33, counting seconds that felt like years. She reached for her blade. But Kaelen's free hand found hers first. Warm, calloused, certain. His fingers interlaced with hers. His palm pressed against her palm. His thumb traced the same pulse point he'd found in the dark tunnel 28 days ago, when she'd been too afraid to breathe and he'd been too afraid to let go. "I don't know what comes next," he said quietly. "I don't know if we win. I don't know if there's even a version of winning that looks like anything we were taught to want." He squeezed her hand. "But I know I'm not doing it without you." Thea looked at the fallen treaties, at the shattered water pitcher, at the king's face, grey, diminished, finally unmasked, at the guards who hadn't yet decided whose orders to follow. Then she looked at Kaelen. 28 days ago, she'd pulled him through a rusted service door into cold November air. 28 days ago, she'd made a choice she couldn't take back. She was still making it. "Then let's go," she said. Behind them, the archive doors burst open. More guards. More shouts. More people arriving too late to witness the moment the old world ended and the new one, unwritten, uncertain, terrifying, finally began. Kaelen's sword still hung in his hand. Thea's treaty knife still rested on the table, blade toward the king. And somewhere outside, past the archive walls and the delegation chambers and the borders neither of them recognized anymore, the November light kept falling. Waiting. Watching. Hoping. Thea pulled Kaelen toward the side exit. His hand stayed in hers. His blade stayed drawn. Behind them, the first guard made his choice. His footsteps followed. The door swung open. And the world, for better or worse, finally began to change. The treaty room looked different in spring. Thea stood in the doorway and let the afternoon light wash over her. April 3rd. 4:17 p.m. The same amber gold that had pulled across the floor 7 months ago. The same tall windows, the same polished oak table. But the north wall was bare now. No carved wolves. No cracked stone. Just plain oak panels waiting for something new. She walked to the table. Her footsteps echoed the same way they always had, off the stone walls, off the high ceiling, off the silence that still remembered every treaty signed here, every promise made, every hand that had trembled over the knife. The cedar box sat in its usual place. Mother of pearl inlay. Brass hinges. The same box she'd opened 1,000 times. The same box she'd carried through a dark tunnel and across a border and into the kind of change that didn't announce itself until you were already living in it. She opened the lid. The treaty knife rested inside. Not the kingdom's knife. That one was in evidence, its microfracture documented, its history written into the official record of King Aldrich's trial. This was her copy. The one she'd sharpened in her childhood cottage while Kaelen slept by the hearth. The one she'd carried into the archive on the day everything changed. The blade caught the 417 light. Polished. Ready. She didn't touch it yet. Footsteps behind her. She knew them now. The weight of his boots, the rhythm of his stride, the slight hesitation before he crossed thresholds. 7 months of learning his footsteps. 7 months of learning the shape of his silence and the sound of his breath changing when he was about to speak. 7 months of learning that home wasn't a place. It was a person walking toward you. He stopped beside her. Close enough that she could feel the warmth of his coat, the familiar scent of pine soap, the quiet steadiness of someone who'd spent 36 years learning to stand still and was finally learning how to stand beside. "The carpenters finished yesterday," he said. "Plain oak, like you asked. No carvings." Thea looked at the north wall. I thought it was time for something new. They offered to carve new wolves. Same design as before. I know. I told them no. She turned to look at him. His face was different now. Softer at the edges, the way faces get when fear loosens its grip. The scar through his left eyebrow had faded to silver. His hands, resting on the table's edge, were healed. No split knuckles. No fresh scabs. Just the callus on his index finger, still there, still familiar. You told them no, she asked. I told them the wolves had served their purpose. He met her eyes. But we are not the same people who needed wolves to keep us apart. The clock on the south wall ticked. 4:18. 4:19. Spring light, soft and golden, pulled between them on the floor. Thea looked down at the treaty knife. At her reflection in the polished steel. Older now, different. Someone who'd walked through fire and come out the other side still holding hands with the person she'd been taught to hate. His reflection appeared beside hers. She watched him in the blade. Not his face, she knew his face. She watched his shoulder, his collar, the way he tilted his head slightly when he was about to say something he'd been practicing in his head. She watched his hand lift from the table. Watched it cross the distance between them. His fingers covered hers on the cedar box lid. Warm. Calloused. Certain. 7 years of space collapsed into 2 inches of polished oak. Her breath caught. His thumb moved across a pulse, slow, steady, like he was memorizing the rhythm. I thought about this room, he said quietly. Every day we were apart. Not the treaties. Not the negotiations. Just this room. The light at 4:17. The way your reflection looked in the knife when you were concentrating. The sound your footsteps made on the stone. Thea swallowed. You remembered my footsteps. I remembered everything. She looked at his reflection in the blade. At the silver scar through his eyebrow. At the quiet certainty in his eyes. Not the vigilance of a crown prince who feared his father's enemies, but the peace of a man who'd finally stopped pretending to be someone else. I remembered your hands, she said. The way you'd fold them on the table when you were waiting for me to speak. The way your knuckles looked after you'd sharpened your bowstrings too long. The way you never looked away when I was talking, even when everyone else in the room was pretending I wasn't there. His thumb traced her pulse again. I never pretended. I know. The clock ticked. 4:22. Outside, the first leaves of spring were unfurling on the oak trees lining the treaty grounds. Inside, the light had shifted from gold to amber, the way it always did in April, the way it always would. Kaelen's hand stayed on hers. His reflection stayed beside hers in the polished steel. We don't have to decide anything today, he said. About the treaties. About the kingdoms. About what comes next. I know. But I need you to know something. He paused. His reflection met her eyes in the blade. I'm not leaving. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not ever. Whatever this is, whatever we are building, I'm staying until it's finished. Thea looked at their reflections. 2 faces in one blade. 2 people who'd spent 7 years learning each other across treaty tables and now stood close enough to share breath. Stay, she said. Not a question. Not a test. Just the truth, finally spoken out loud. His hand tightened on hers. His reflection smiled, small, quiet, real. Always, he said. The afternoon light continued its slow crawl across the treaty room floor. 4:30. 4:31. The clock kept time the way it always had, the way it always would, marking seconds and minutes and hours that would add up to years. But something had shifted. Not the light. Not the room. Not the treaty knife waiting in its cedar box. Something inside them. Thea turned from the blade. Faced the north wall, plain oak, unpainted, unwatched. No wolves. No carved warnings. Just wood and possibility and the quiet hum of a room that had held too much silence for too long. Behind her, Kaelen didn't move. But his hand found hers again. Fingers interlaced. palm against palm. "I never asked," he said, "what you want carved there." She thought about it. The oak trees by the creek. The rope swing moving in October wind. Her mother's clock, still ticking. His childhood scar, silver now. The dispatch tube warm in his hands. The tunnel. The cottage. The mirror that had shown her fragments of a face she was finally learning to recognize. "Nothing," she said. "Just the wood. Just the light." He nodded. Didn't ask why. Didn't need to. They stood together in the treaty room, watching afternoon become evening, watching the light shift from gold to amber to the soft grey of early dusk. The cedar box remained open. The treaty knife remained polished. The north wall remained bare. But the room didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like beginning. Outside, the first spring flowers were pushing through soil that had frozen solid 7 months ago. The oak trees were unfurling leaves that hadn't existed last autumn. The creek behind her childhood cottage was running clear and cold, carrying meltwater from mountains neither of them had climbed yet. Thea leaned her head against Kaelen's shoulder. His arm came around her waist. Steady. Warm. Real. "I never thought I'd come back here," she said. "After the garrison burned, I told myself I'd never set foot in this room again. Too many memories. Too many people I'd lost. And now..." She watched the light fade from the north wall, watched the plain oak panels glow amber, then grey, then the soft silver of early evening. "Now I think," she said, "that memories aren't the same as ghosts. The people we lost, they're not in this room. They're in the creek behind my mother's cottage. They're in the oak tree by the garrison. They're in the way I sharpen my blade and the way you hesitate before you speak and the way we both learned to wait when waiting was the only thing we could do." She paused, felt his breath steady against her hair. "They're not here," she said. "But we are." Kaelen pressed his cheek to her temple. His hand found hers again. His thumb traced the same pulse point he'd found in the dark tunnel 7 months ago, when neither of them knew if they'd survive the night. "We are," he agreed. The treaty room settled into evening. The clock kept ticking. The cedar box waited. The north wall held its silence. But outside, through the tall windows, the first stars were appearing. April stars, bright and cold and patient. The same stars that had watched Thea climb oak trees as a girl. The same stars that had watched Kaelen learn to shoot a bow in his brother's shadow. The same stars that would watch them tomorrow, and the next day, and all the days after that. 4:53. Thea lifted her head from Kaelen's shoulder, looked at his face in the fading light, the silver scar, the steady eyes, the quiet smile he only wore when they were alone. "Same time Thursday?" she asked. His smile deepened. "Same time Thursday." She closed the cedar box. Mother of pearl inlay catching the last of the light. Her treaty knife safe inside. His hand still holding hers. They walked out together. Behind them, the treaty room settled into darkness. The clock ticked on. The north wall waited for decisions not yet made. But the room wasn't empty. It was full of possibility. And for the first time in 7 years, that felt like enough.